Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Adam Levine, and I'm the Executive Director here at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, or NYMTC. As the Downstate Region's Metropolitan Planning Organization, NYMTC provides a collaborative planning forum to address transportation-related issues and develop regional plans through the shared vision of our members for the transportation network that connects New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. We are holding two public review sessions today to gather input on two very important documents: a draft Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, for federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030, as well as a draft Transportation Conformity Determination under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. In addition to this meeting at 3 p.m., we are holding another virtual session this evening at 7 p.m. These documents were made available to the public on Monday, June 2nd, 2025, and we will be accepting comments here today and through the end of the public comment period, which closes at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, July 1st, 2025. The draft federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030 TIP lists the federally funded transportation improvement projects proposed for the NYMTC planning area over the TIP period. These improvements cover various transportation modes and facilities, including roadways and bridges, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, transit equipment and services, safety improvements, and demand management programs. The draft Transportation Conformity Determination ensures that transportation projects and programs in the proposed federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030 TIP and the federal fiscal years 2026 to 2055 Regional Transportation Plan, entitled Moving Forward 2055, are consistent with the motor vehicle emissions budgets set by the New York State Implementation Plan for air quality in relation to relevant non-attainment and maintenance areas. You will hear more about each of these draft documents in the presentations this afternoon. First, we will hear from Mary Byrne, who is Staff Director of our Nassau-Suffolk Transportation Coordinating Committee and part of the leadership team here at NYMTC. Mary will be presenting on the draft TIP. Following Mary's presentation, we will hear your comments. More on that in a moment. Following Mary's presentation and receipt of your comments, we will hear from Mark Maglianti, Assistant Director of our Planning and Program Management Group. Mark will present on the draft Transportation Conformity Determination. After Mark's presentation, we will again be open to receiving your comments. There are a number of ways you can submit your comments. During this meeting, you can type them into the WebEx chat box or use the hand raise function, and we will call on you and unmute you to hear your comments. Note that we will be limiting your oral comments to 3 minutes, and NYMTC staff will let you know when you have reached the time limit. You can also submit comments in writing to us here in our offices to the address soon to be shown in the chat box. You're also welcome to email us at nymtec-public-info@dot.ny.gov. That email address will also be shown in the chat box soon. I also ask that you let us know via the chat how you heard about this meeting. This helps us learn more about our audiences and ways to improve our outreach to the public. Finally, before I hand this over to Mary, I want to let you know about two other major documents that will be available for public review later this month. Starting June 30th, 2025 through July 30th, 2025, NYMTC will invite you to review and comment on the draft of Moving Forward 2055, our next regional transportation plan for New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. Your input is important as we work to complete the planning effort, which will establish the region's long-term transportation needs and goals from 2026 through 2055. Also available for comments will be the draft 2025 Congestion Management Process Status Report. There will be public review meetings for these two draft documents, also at 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. on Tuesday, July 15th via WebEx. You will be able to find more information on these meetings at nymtec.org beginning on June 30th. We hope to see you there. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will now turn it over to Mary for her presentation. Mary? Mary, you're muted if you're talking.
Hopefully you can see my full screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, and thank you to all the attendees for joining us today for this review web meeting. Okay, just bear with me one moment. Okay. We are here today to provide an overview of the proposed Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, and show you its role in the transportation planning process. The TIP document has been posted to the NYMTC website and has been publicly available since the comment period began on June 2nd, 2025. We are accepting comments and feedback on the proposed TIP until the comment period closes at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, July 1st, 2025. Comments will be addressed as part of the final TIP. Before we discuss the Transportation Improvement Plan, let me tell you a bit about NYMTC and the transportation planning process. We are the Metropolitan Planning Organization for New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. In order to receive federal transportation and planning funds, federal regulations require that each urbanized area with a population of 50,000 or greater must have a planning process. In the New York City urbanized area, implementing this transportation planning process is the responsibility of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. This is NYMTC's 10-county planning area, which is home to approximately 13.2 million people. This is approximately 65% of New York State's population and 4% of the population of our nation. Our planning area covers approximately 2,440 square miles. As you can see, this planning area is divided into sub-regional areas. This allows us to better respond to local need. Each sub-area is served by a Transportation Coordinating Committee, or TCC. Rockland, Putnam, and Westchester counties are served by the Mid-Hudson South TCC. Nassau and Suffolk counties are served by the Nassau-Suffolk TCC, and the Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island, Brooklyn, and Queens are served by the New York City TCC. NYMTC is a regional council comprised of 9 voting and 7 advisory members. Voting members include the county executives of the 5 suburban counties of Westchester, Rockland, Putnam, Nassau, and Suffolk counties. The Commissioner of New York City's Department of Transportation and the Director of its Department of City Planning, the Commissioner of the New York State Department of Transportation and the Chief Executive Officer of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Advisory members include Chief Executive Officer of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Transit, and the Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, and the regional or division directors of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, and the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Congress funds transportation with a multi-year authorization act. The current authorization act is known as the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, or EJA, and it maintains funding programs from the previous authorization act and adds a few new ones. This act is set to expire on September 30th, 2026. Transportation funds are apportioned to the states based on formulas set by Congress. Congress also passes an annual Appropriations Act, which provides budget authority to obligate and expend funding for those transportation programs. Here you can see the increase in federal authorization levels since the passage of EJA relative to its predecessor, the FAST Act. EJA includes an increase of $274 billion in federal authorizations. This slide shows a listing of the current federal funding programs contained within the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, which was signed into law on November 15, 2021. The funding programs shown here are Title 23 funding programs, which are administered by FHWA. Each funding program has its own purpose and eligibility requirements. These programs are formula funding programs, which mean that funding is allocated to the states based on a specific formula. On the right-hand side, you can see the EGIF funding level increases over the FAST Act levels. The FAST Act dates to 2015. New funding programs added with the passage of EJA are noted here also. Some of these funding programs can be utilized by transit providers, examples being CMAQ and carbon reduction program funding. And here we have the Title 49 funding programs, which are administered by FTA. Again, each funding program has its own purpose and eligibility requirements. Overall funding level increases over the FAST Act levels are shown on the lower right-hand side of the screen. In addition to formula funding, EJA contains discretionary or competitive fund sources, as well as pilot programs. The number of funding programs and the amount set aside for these programs is unprecedented in any other funding act. These nationally competitive discretionary programs are administered by US DOT and have been offered on a yearly basis. You can see some of these programs here, which have their own purpose and eligibility requirements. This graphic shows how federal, state, and local resources flow through NYMTC to project sponsors to fully fund transportation projects included in the metropolitan planning process. Congress apportions federal formula funds to the states, where they are then distributed to the New York State DOT administrative regions. This funding flows through the Metropolitan Planning Organization, in our case through NYMTC, for use by the member agencies. Federal formula funds are combined with state and local resources for use by the sponsors, who are the owners and operators of the transportation facilities or services. Each formula fund source has its own matching requirements, but it is typically in the range of 80% federal and 20% state and local match. Discretionary program funding is administered directly by US DOT. We will now look at the metropolitan planning process. This slide demonstrates the continuing cooperative and comprehensive planning process required for receipt of federal transportation funding. Our mandated planning products include a long-range regional transportation plan, which is a minimum of 20 years and is also known as the plan, a medium-range transportation improvement program, which has a minimum 4-year program and is also called the TIP, an annual unified planning work program, which is a 1-year program and it's also called the UPWP, a congestion management process or CMP, since NYMTC's planning area is designated as a transportation management area or TMA. A transportation conformity determination containing a regional emissions analysis, since NYMTC's planning area includes all or part of several air quality, non-attainment, or maintenance areas under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, and a periodically updated public involvement plan. We are currently working in this portion of the planning process circled in red here, the Transportation Improvement Program or TIP. The TIP is the focus of this portion of the web meeting. A later portion of the meeting will focus on transportation conformity or the regional emissions analysis. It's an enabling document, and the funds appropriated by Congress and programmed by NYMTC's members represent the collective decision-making of our Metropolitan Planning Organization. NYMTC's voting members have selected projects for inclusion in the TIP based on the needs and goals identified in its planning process. NYMTC's TIP is programmed for 5 years from federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030. The first 4 years of the TIP matches the State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP, which enables the obligation and eventual federal reimbursement of funds encumbered by our members. The TIP is substantial, with over 900 projects. Our Metropolitan Planning Organization provides funding for numerous transportation needs in areas which include transit projects, roadway and bridge projects, including rehab and construction, bicycle and pedestrian projects, safety projects, system and demand management projects, and last but not least, operating and maintenance projects. A new TIP is usually developed every 2 to 3 years. This is an enormous effort, and it can take as long as an entire year to develop and construct a new TIP. This effort requires the coordination of many agencies. Development cycles are also coordinated with the statewide TIP or STIP development schedule and with our sister MPOs. TIP development cycles include air quality analysis to ensure the projects selected do not violate the National Ambient Air Quality Standards under the Clean Air Act. During each cycle, existing projects are updated and new projects are programmed and new fiscal years are added. Our last TIP cycle occurred for the federal fiscal years 2023 to 2027. This is our current program. The proposed federal 26 to 30 program replaces the current program and a handoff advancing projects previously chosen while shifting the direction to meet our region's future needs. Here we illustrate the TIP as the current TIP versus the proposed TIP. As you can see, we are in the 3rd year of the existing TIP. Our new TIP will begin in the 4th year of the current TIP, and it will replace that TIP. This will be the start of a new 5-year transportation program compiled by the members to address our region's future transportation needs. To fund NYMTC's program, the state, acting through the New York State Department of Transportation, divides each formula fund between allocable and non-allocable categories. Formula funds include the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, the National Highway Performance Program, and the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. The state also creates funding targets for each of these federal fund sources, which are used as parameters to guide our program building efforts. Allocable funding targets are identified for each region, while non-allocable funding is managed centrally by the state in conjunction with the metropolitan planning organizations. The intent of this TIP update is to identify needs independent of fund sources and distribute targets accordingly. Funding or planning targets for the proposed federal fiscals 2026 to 2030 TIP are set with the following assumptions. Federal authorizations for each funding program are set by the EJA through September 30th, 2026. Assumed New York State funding levels for federal fiscals 27 through 30 are derived from the EJA authorizations. New York State Department of Transportation uses these assumed funding levels to develop planning targets for each of its 11 administrative regions. 3 of the 11 New York State DOT administrative regions are contained within the NYMTC planning area. Region 8 covers 7 counties in the Lower Hudson Valley. 3 of them are in NYMTC's planning area. Region 10 includes Nassau and Suffolk counties, both of which are in NYMTC's planning area. And Region 11 covers the 5 boroughs of New York City, all of which are in NYMTC's planning area. NYMTC's program is fiscally constrained. Fiscal constraint has been a requirement since the passage of the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act in 1991. The program, therefore, is not just a collection of projects or a wish list. It is federally mandated that the fiscally constrained program not exceed resources that are reasonably expected to be available in our regional transportation plan and transportation improvement program. To that end, our program cannot exceed the planning targets set by the state. The program is balanced against the various funding streams to ensure that resources are sufficient to cover the proposed expenses. We will now demonstrate to you the sheer magnitude of our program and its impact to the region. The proposed 2026 through 2030 TIP program includes $38.9 billion worth of projects. This graph splits the total amount of NYMTC subregions, New York, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. Some important things to note. There was a 5% increase between TIPs from $36.9 billion in the 23 to 27 program to a $38.9 billion for this proposed 26 to 30 program. Roughly 79% of the $38.9 billion total is programmed to New York City. It is important to note that a significant portion of this total includes locally funded transit-related MTA projects. Per federal regulations, we must include regionally significant projects within the TIP, even if they do not use federal aid. As shown on screen, the remaining 21% is programmed for Long Island and the Lower Hudson Valley. This graph demonstrates the programs split out by federal fiscal years. Usually, most of the spending happens within the first few years. In this case, we expect to utilize 44% of the total programmed amount by the end of federal fiscal 27 and approximately 18.7% during each of the remaining years in the TIP. There is a steady decline in programmed amounts between federal fiscals 26 and federal fiscal 28, and then a sudden spike in federal fiscal 29 before reverting to the pattern seen in the first 3 years. The pie graph on this slide shows how the proposed TIP's $38.9 billion program is funded. 58% federal and 42% state or local aid, respectively. In contrast, the current adopted TIP utilizes more state and local aid, with the split being 40% to 60%. It all comes down to the projects being programmed and the availability of federal funds. There are 908 unique projects of varying sizes and scopes within this program. At this time, I want to emphasize that the number of projects should not be conflated with the size of a subregion's program. After all, even though approximately 79% of the program will go to New York City, most of the projects are attributed to Long Island. The next two graphs break down the program by project purpose or work type. This one is dedicated to highway-related work types, which make up 26% of the entire program. Most of them are self-explanatory, but I want to take some time to quickly go over some of the ones that are not as intuitive. Study refers to the study of transportation alternatives within a specific route or transportation problem. New construction is for the construction of new highways or added lanes on existing roadways. That is why it has its own dedicated work type as opposed to being included among the other categories. And mobility is for projects that aim to reduce the number of one-passenger vehicles and encourage other forms of transportation. This graph on screen shows transit-related work types, which make up the bulk of the program total. Whereas the highway-related work types are more generic, most of the transit work types are linked to MTA's projects across all NYMTC subregions using their classification system. The only exception is transit, the largest category on the chart, which is for non-MTA transit projects that add services or capacity to the transit network, including ferries. I want to once again take some time to highlight some items before we move on. Large-scale projects like the 2nd Avenue train line are very expensive, which is why 15 new route is the second largest category, despite there only being one project assigned to the work type. 10% of the transit total, or $3.048 billion, is dedicated to miscellaneous MTA categories. They include operating costs and blocked off funds for future MTA projects. In summary, these work types all add up to $28.7 billion on the right side of the screen, or 74% of the entire program. In addition to publishing the tip for public review, NYMTC must make it available in an electronically accessible format. We have the project visualization link shown here for that purpose. The visualization is prepared using ArcGIS Online to help the users to find projects in their area quickly. This link can also be found on the NYMTC website. Here I clicked on the ArcGIS Online link from the previous screen. I then zoomed into the Putnam County area located within the Mid-Hudson South Transportation Coordinating Committee. I selected a highway icon, which you can see is highlighted, to learn more about the project at that location. Here I looked at the Suffolk County area located within the Nassau-Suffolk TCC. I again selected a highway icon, which is highlighted, to learn more about that project in Suffolk. In this instance, I zoomed into the Brooklyn area, which is part of the New York City TCC. I then clicked on the transit icon shown to discover more about the transit project at that location. With the passage of MAP 21 in 2012, Congress, through the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act, set additional requirements tying the development of the TIP and the long-range regional transportation plan with national goals and targets. These national performance goals include improving safety, infrastructure condition, congestion reduction, system reliability, freight movement and economic vitality, improved project delivery, and of course, the critically important environmental sustainability. To learn more about it, please download the TIP document and reference Appendix A, where we provide a detailed explanation of the performance measures, our targets, and how our program is meeting them. Moving on to the development of the 2026 through 2030 NYMTC TIP timeline, we are currently within the 30-day public review period for the TIP, which started on June 2nd, 2025, and concludes at 4 p.m. July 1st, 2025. From July 29th to August 1st, we are holding our executive meetings to recommend the sub-regional project listings on the TIP. On August 21st, 2025, the Program Finance and Administration Committee meeting will recommend the full draft TIP for council adoption. Then on September 5th, 2025, the council meeting to adopt the TIP will be held. The TIP will then be combined with the statewide transportation improvement program for adoption by our federal partners. Thank you for your time and attention. Do we have any comments?
There's nothing in the chat right now, but we do have a hand raised.
Hey, Shan Cirillo. Could you please, do you have a question? The mic is on mute.
I just have a question regarding a specific project in Nassau County. The project number is 076120. It's the Long Beach Bridge rehabilitation. And I was just wondering if there's any plan or if you guys have been in contact with whoever's doing design work for that to add bicycle infrastructure to that bridge, as it's the only crossing for a large amount of people on the south shore of Nassau to get to the beach via bicycle or walking. And currently the only way, or most people share a very narrow sidewalk with pedestrians. And if they rehabilitate this bridge and they spend the estimated, it says $30 million, and don't add anything, that basically is going to set us back another 50 years in terms of getting some sort of bicycle infrastructure in place on that route.
Okay. So Sean, I believe you also sent this comment into our website for comments. And we did receive a response from Nassau County that will be published in the TIP document. Nassau County's response included that the existing bridge will not be widened or expanded, but multimodal transportation will be taken into consideration during the design phase of the project. And the addition of any new multimodal elements will depend on safety, feasibility, and budget. So that's what I have to share with you on that at this point in time. Thank you.
And he just said, okay, thank you in the chat. There are no other messages in the chat, but feel free to leave a question or comment in the chat function, and we can get it answered for you.
All right, thank you, Mary.
Okay, thank you.
I think if you're all set, we can move on to Mark's portion and the conformity determination. Mark?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share. Okay, thank you, Adam, and good afternoon, folks. Happy to be here to talk about the next plan and tip, rather the next tip and the plan as it relates to conformity. So I'm going to go over a bit of overview of conformity, transportation conformity, the process itself. We'll talk a bit about air quality standards. Some of these things Mary mentioned in her portion of her presentation, so we'll dive in a little deeper. We're going to cover how non-attainment and maintenance areas are identified and the regional emissions analysis process itself, and then we'll look at some results. So if you recall from Mary's presentation, this transportation planning process cycle.
Excuse me, Mark, your presentation is not showing yet.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Worries.
Apologies. Let's try that. Whoops.
There you go. You're all set.
One more time. Okay. Apologies for that. So the transportation planning process that we saw from Mary's presentation is shown here. The transportation improvement program that Mary covered is in the light yellow. I'd rather say the light blue. The long range plan is in the orange in the middle. And the step we're talking about now is this regional emissions analysis or conformity determination. And this supports and evaluates the impacts from the plan and the tip. It's a requirement of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, which set the national and air quality standards for certain criteria pollutants. And it's required for eligibility for federal transportation funding in areas that have not attained those standards or non-attainment areas. So we say that this connects air quality planning with our transportation planning. And because it's focused on transportation, we look at mobile source emissions from cars, trucks, motorcycles, and transit. So big picture, the main steps of this conformity determination involve the identification of an air quality standard. That's the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. Areas that are not meeting that standard, the state has to develop a plan to meet those standards. We call that a state implementation plan or a SIP. In that SIP, there are many tools used to meet that the state will identify to use to meet those standards in various sectors. For the transportation sector, they use what's called a budget, or a motor vehicle emissions budget, or a cap on certain emissions. And at the MPO level, NYMTC is trying to show and must show that our future plan and our future program, the system that we're looking to produce, is not going to exceed those emission budgets that the SIP set. That essentially makes up the regional emissions analysis. The way we do that out into the future is we use a travel demand forecast model, which is going to simulate the transportation network, as well as including all these projects that we're talking about in the TIP and the plan. We model that transportation behavior out into the future, and that gives us a measure of how much travel is taking place. And from the travel, we can combine that using an emissions simulator, or MOVES, and that will generate for us a total amount of emissions out into the future by location. I'm sorry, and then we will compare that to the emission budget. So the need for this transportation conformity determination can certainly come from a new plan TIP as it's being done, as it's happening now, but it can also be triggered by new non-exempt projects that are added to a plan or a TIP, or major scope changes that are needed to a certain project. Anything that's going to change that future system that we're talking about. And of course, if you change a non-attainment area, if a new area gets a designated non-attainment, we'll need to run conformity then, or if a new budget is identified in the SIP. So in our situation, we're undertaking this conformity determination to align with the development of the new 2630 Transportation Improvement Program and the 2655 Regional Transportation Plan, or Long Range Plan, which, as was mentioned before, will be released for public review on June 30th. So a little bit about how these standards are used to identify non-attainment areas. So the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for specific pollutants are identified at the federal level. There's criteria for how those standards are to be met and measured. Actual air quality measurements are taken in the field by the state, and those measurements will determine whether certain areas are meeting or are in attainment. If they are non-attainment, note that some pollutants, some criteria pollutants will have various levels of non-attainment. And if an area was found to be in non-attainment and then is meeting the standard, it's moved into a maintenance, what's called a maintenance phase or period. So you have an attainment area, but it's still being watched and evaluated during this maintenance period. Geographically, if you look at these areas, these non-attainment areas, on the left, you see that the 8-hour ozone criteria pollutant crosses state borders and crosses MPO borders, as does the PM 2.5, which is particulate matter, small, fine particulate matter. The area crosses from New Jersey all the way into Connecticut across the MPO borders, and that comes into affect how we conduct the analysis. If we zoom into those two areas, just at the New York area, which is where we're concerned with, we can see the same on the left. The 8-hour ozone area is, and then we add the MPO NYMTC boundary, we can see that the non-attainment area does not extend into Putnam, and so that affects our analysis. And in a similar fashion on the right, the PM 2.5 maintenance area does extend beyond MPO's boundary into Orange County, and so that adds an additional level of analysis. We mentioned the State Implementation Plan for Air Quality, or SIP, and again, that's aimed at addressing those non-attainment areas based on those standards. It is the state's plan for attaining those standards by certain target years. And it's, as far as we're concerned, it's focused on transportation, and it provides those emission budgets for us, which we compare to the plan and the TIP. And the pollutants that we're analyzing based on that SIP are ozone and fine particulate matter. Throughout this process, we're also required to consult with our Interagency Consultation Group, or ICG. This is a federally mandated requirement. It's a group made up of members from the EPA, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, New York State DEC, and New York State DOT. They guide us and provide concurrence on various steps in our process, including identifying the latest available planning assumptions. These are things like current and future tolling and additional inputs into our travel demand models, such as population forecasts and socioeconomic data. They ensure that we're using the correct transportation demand modeling approach, that we're using the correct mobile source emissions post-processor, in this case MOVES, and that we've considered our identification of all of our proposed projects and identified non-exempts correctly and regionally significant transportation projects as we include those into our modeling, and that we've used the correct emission source tests to determine conformity with the SIP budget. We also coordinate extensively with our member agencies as they are providing the project information, and we're not just working with them to identify their projects, but we need to identify sufficient details from those projects so that we can code them into the model and use them to forecast the future transportation system. And as we said, because the areas extend beyond our MPO boundary, we coordinate with Orange County Transportation Council and Dutchess County Transportation Council. So just to recap real quick, essentially the regional emissions analysis, which is the core of the transportation conformity, basically involves coding non-exempt projects that are likely to affect capacity in the region. We code them into our best practice activity model, our travel demand model. We run that model, the BPM, for future years, and that generates vehicle miles traveled and vehicle hours traveled. With that data, we can use US EPA's MOVES, or Motor Vehicle Emission Simulator, to then generate the emissions from all those vehicle miles that are traveling at any given time. And then we can identify an amount of pollutant by county and by specific scenario year. And then we compare those emissions for each year with those budgets that are set by the SIP. So let's look at the results of this analysis. So for our first criteria pollutant, we are looking at 8-hour ozone, and on the left you see the non-attainment area again. And the first test for this pollutant is the daily nitrogen oxides, which is an ozone precursor. And on the right, you see the graph which shows the ozone SIP budget in orange and our forecasted emissions in blue. Second test for this criteria pollutant is the daily volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which is another ozone precursor. And the non-attainment area is the same on the left, and on the right, the ozone SIP budget is in orange, and the forecasted emissions from our analysis is in blue. Excuse me. For PM 2.5, the maintenance area on the left is shown on the map, and the test here is an annual test of nitrogen oxides, again, so in tons per year. The SIP budget is in orange, and the forecasted emissions is shown in blue. And then the last test for PM 2.5 is an annual assessment of PM 2.5 itself. And as you can see, the SIP budget on the right in orange, and the total emissions forecasted in blue, for tons of particulate matter per year. So based on these results, we can say that the proposed federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030 TIP and the federal fiscal years 26 to 2055 regional transportation plan conform with the applicable New York State SIP for ozone and PM 2.5. and that this demonstrates the consistency of the TIP and the RTP with the intent of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 and the state and federal transportation conformity regulations. So as was mentioned before, the comment period for the TIP and for this conformity extend through Tuesday, July 1st, and comments can be sent by mail, email, or through our comment form on our website. And the draft transportation conformity documents, including this slideshow, are available at our comment period website. With that, I will pass it back to Stephanie and Fidel for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Mark. I don't see any questions on the chat right now, but if anyone has a question, they can raise their virtual hand if they like.
Not seeing anything yet.
I don't see, yep, we don't see no hands raised on the attendees list.
Stephanie, thank you for dropping the email address in the chat so folks can email us later if you're looking forward to exploring both of these documents on our website and may have questions later. You do have time. So we look forward to hearing from you. Not sure if there may be anything more.
I'm going to stop sharing here, Adam. It's okay.
Sure. I think we can maybe give folks a couple of minutes to furiously pull up the perhaps ArcGIS page on the TIP website. Look up a project and ask us a question, but that's not much time. So folks, you do have a little bit more than that. I think it's about 2 weeks. All right, I think perhaps, unless we have any other comments or questions or hands raised, I think we'll want to thank everyone for joining us. Unless there's any particular reason we need to stay on, I think perhaps we might finish this session and look forward to seeing folks again at 7 p.m. Anything else before we wish you all well? All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have
Thank
a
you
great
so much.
evening.